doing something new today. I was feeling the urge to lead the group in a slightly different direction, as I told you last time. In the last year, we have been talking about so many astrological topics. We started like a little study group, and initially we were exploring archetypes, very separate things here and there. Then later on, things became a little bit more technical. We started looking at things like the lunation cycle, which is also related to Rudhyar and what we'll be talking about today. But I felt like it was a bit chaotic, and it was time to put the focus back to what my concentration is in my studies, my interests, and to try to offer that to you as well as a new perspective. Maybe for some of you it's not new, but how many have been reading Rudhyar so far? Have you? Yes, Sharon, and you, Fabiana, Nina, Effie. Yes, so a lot of the things I'm going to say today will probably not be new for you, but at least we can maybe discuss the whole perspective of why we are all into astrology in the first place from a slightly different angle. And what I'm planning to do is a series of 5 meetings where we can touch on one of the books by Rudhyar, The Practice of Astrology, one of the books that I normally recommend to people that are just starting, and that are just starting in whatever school, because maybe this is not very clear to everyone, but with Rudhyar's work, it's not about some sort of alternative technique, even though there is a lot of that as well, which is to contradict, for example, traditional astrology or psychological astrology or something else that people may choose to do. But it is an overall different philosophical look on why we're doing what we're doing and what's the purpose of it. So I'm sorry, I will actually wait a little bit more because people keep coming in and I'm getting a bit distracted by that. But can you tell me what brought you here? Do you have a specific interest regarding Rudhyar's work, or are you just curious to see what this is all about? Anyone wants to say something?
Radalina, I'll speak. Linda.
Yes, Linda.
Well, I think, you know, when I first started listening to you, I explained to you that I'm very new to astrology in terms of learning it in depth. Always been interested in it, but it's only really been the last year or 9 months I've really started looking at it. And I just find this group very, very interesting, and I learn a lot. So for me, it's about being open to learning. I don't know anything about him. I've never read any of his books. I've read other books. So I'm here really just for the learning experience and looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? How about you? What is your background in Rudhyar's work and in general, as you're here with us for the first time?
Yeah, hi. Greetings, everybody. My name is Suvacho. Thank you, Radilina, for having me on here for the first time. What is my background? I think my background, I began a couple of years ago getting, how would you say it? From just dabbling a bit to take very serious archetypal astrology, I began studying transit astrology, archetypal astrology, and of course, really get a sense of how Rudhyar is always there in the background. His whole sense of lunation cycles really informs all this different work. Yeah, so I look forward to hear more. Thanks.
Right. It is interesting how many other schools of astrology, let's say, or people that have never even touched on Rudhyar, they don't even realize how much they're indebted to the work he did, as it's really, as you said, permeated through a lot of other books and materials we can find elsewhere. But there are certain things about it, even though it's so vast and so difficult to frame, certain things about it which I thought we all need to know about. We all need to together explore. I don't feel myself to be any expert on Rudhyar, don't get me wrong. I was very hesitant before I introduced this webinar because I wasn't thinking that it is my business to present something that is of such, philosophical and theoretical, expansive influence and difficulty. But I thought to myself, oh, isn't it the best way to learn something by trying to teach it to somebody else? So that's been my approach. And instead of just talking to clients, people that come for consultations, and trying to shift their overall view of what is the chart about, how to view their own chart, not just what individual things in the chart mean that we all spend so much time studying, but the overall meaning of the whole process of delving into astrology in the first place. What can be the dangers about it? What can be the misconceptions? And I very often find myself trying to disprove things rather than, kind of saying the positive or the constructive. So I wanted to try to change that and to spend maybe the first hour or so of today's meeting in a presentation, which is going to be focusing on the practice of astrology. That's a book by Rudhyar, which, as I said, is something very basic as a starting point. He is expanding on all those ideas that he very briefly jots down in this book, which is something like a synthesis of his ideas. And it is available online for everyone to read on Rudhyar.com. I can maybe share later and show you the page. Maybe you know this website. It's an archive of Rudhyar's astrological work where you can find almost everything. Some of the books are not there, like some fundamental books like the practice of astrology and sorry, excuse me, it's not called the practice of astrology. What was the book from 1933, 34? Dwayne, help me. Was it not the person-centered astrology, but the very first one that the groundbreaking book, just escaping me at the moment.
The Astrology of Personality?
Yes.
Astrology of Personality, yes, exactly. Actually, I've got it at the end as recommended books, but that's still not there. But I was that's it, James. I was very happy to see that last year, at some point, they had published online on Kindle a lot of those books by Rudhyar. Planetarization of Consciousness, Astrology of Personality, even the Aspects book is there now, which is very, very good and accessible. So, okay, where do we start? I wrote a presentation, so I will begin with that. And I will mute you all during this, just so I can get clearer sound. But you can interrupt if you wish to ask something. And then the second part will be general discussion. So we can talk about these things and we can see how what you've got to say, because maybe you see them differently. And I will be very interested to hear any examples from your everyday practice. Those of you that are practicing astrologers or beginning, doesn't matter your level, just so that we can see whether this whole thing is relevant to us. This has been my direction of study since the beginning. I found Rudhyar very early, maybe too early, because I was very inexperienced, very unknowledgeable at the time. I had to read one article, one chapter several times before I started getting the concepts. But I've been persistent with it, and I'm seeing how over time things get clearer and clearer. And actually, I'll try to simplify today as much as possible, so it's easy for beginners as well. There won't be a lot of theory today, so don't worry. From next time or the time after, if we get there, I hope we will, there will be more actual astrological techniques. For example, what are the planets about, the houses, the signs, just the nitty and gritty of it all. But today we will be philosophizing more. We will be looking at the ethical, psychological, general perspective that we all maybe have towards what we do, and to ask ourselves some questions that Rudhyar thought were crucial, and I agree with him. I think if we don't start from here, if we don't start from this book and from these questions, a lot of what follows may have no point. We may accumulate later a lot of knowledge, a lot of example charts that we have been through, or people that we have been studying, but missing the point of what this is really achieving at the end of the day. So without further ado, let's look at the presentation. I'm going to share the screen now. Okay. So now, could you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me just adjust the window quickly. All right. Any questions, comments, anything you want to share before we start? Hello, Lauren, by the way. I missed you.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy. And I was just thinking how you're fulfilling one of your goals, and it makes me happy to participate.
Oh, thank you very much. I hope I managed to at least start with this. Yes.
I'm happy. And of course, I love Rudhyar, and I would say he's the first person that I ever got contacted with. And I accumulated his books, and I can't wait to hear your synthesis of it all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. So now you're all muted. You can unmute yourselves whenever you want to speak. And I'll try to leave time at the end as well, so we have plenty of time to discuss it. Okay. Now, last time, it was Dwayne's idea to begin with this book. And I think if we are to continue with this week after week, exploring different aspects of humanistic astrology or person-centered astrology, then maybe we can look at different books by Rudhyar and small sections of them. One time we can discuss houses, signs, something else. The aspects, for example, the aspects book is very interesting, or the lunation cycle. We have done a little bit of this in the previous discussion. So if you go back to the channel, you can see that we had a discussion on the Sabian symbols, on the progressed lunation cycle, but it wasn't that much in depth. It was a little bit more based on looking at different charts and touching on a few things, but not really concentrating on his basic ideas. So I didn't know whether it would have been like worth it to literally follow the book, but I thought, why not? Why not go through it together? Because maybe a lot of people find it a little bit difficult to read Rudhyar. His writings could be a little philosophical, poetic at some points, not always very easy reading, So they require a particular state of mind, a particular attitude. And at the same time, I don't think they're that difficult. Depends which book also we're talking about. And so that's why I thought, why don't I do my homework and try to give it to you through my perspective and see whether we can decipher together some of the things that may not be that clear if you just spend the time yourself. So this is the book, The Practice of Astrology. I think some of you have it as a real book. Maybe you do, Dwayne. I don't, because it's long out of print, but you can find it on this website here at the bottom. And it's free. And the book is more a collection of essays or collection of articles. That's how I see it. It's very short. You can easily read it within a few days, or quicker. And let's delve in. He's dividing it into 3 basic steps for acquiring astrological knowledge and wisdom. And that's what I will be focusing next 5 sessions on, today and the next 4. So today I will be looking at the first 3 steps, and we'll see where that's going to get us. Now, first of all, Rudhyar calls astrology a technique for understanding, first and foremost. And right in the beginning, he's pointing our attention to the fact that there are many different techniques, many different schools and astrological studies that people practice and get interested in, involved in. And especially in recent times, in the 19th and the 20th century, mostly, we have seen an enormous revolution in astrological studies. Not only ancient techniques and material has been uncovered and looked at again with new eyes, including by Rudhyar, but also so many adjustments have been made towards depth psychology, towards many esoteric practices as well. And also that in the East and in the West, we have completely different systems that we are practicing. So he laid out 4 different approaches to astrology, and they are the trends of the modern day. Usually people gravitate around one of them or a few of them, but they don't always have to contradict one another. They can be mixed. And his main approach is really the last one of those points, but let's look one by one. It has become very trendy, really, nowadays to try to simplify the language of astrology, those different things that we can extract as symbols from the planets, houses, and all other things that we use in our everyday language, to give in the hands of modern people a psychological tool, something to also be for the wider market of curious people that just want to understand what's behind the symbols, but in a very non-personalized way, in a way that is kind of looking for shortcuts. Under this category, we can put the sun sign astrology, those taken out of context analysis of a particular planet or transit of a planet. But even though this is quite superficial, and I know a lot of you are probably trying to overcome it and get a bit frustrated when you see in different places online or in books or wherever this very, very simplified approach, and you feel like it's incomplete. You try to maybe sometimes explain to people that there is a lot more there than only your sun sign or your ascendant sign or anything really separately can tell you about how things function in the psyche, and also as expressed experiences in our everyday lives. And usually those simplified methods revolve around ancient astrological techniques. They repeat what the old books had to say. Very often not thinking whether this has any relevance to what we need as people today for our own exploration of the world and how we live in this world. Then there is another more scientific approach to astrology. Again, Rudhyar says that there is absolutely nothing wrong with any of these things and is not necessarily trying to contradict them. I have been listening in the last couple of days some of the audio archives of Rudhyar, which I had been quite into years ago, but I had kind of put aside for a long time and had forgotten how his voice sounds. But in my preparation for today, I came back to them. And so these are like a bunch of lectures that Rudhyar gave audio. It's an audio archive towards the end of his life, and you can listen to them as well for free online. I'll give you the link later. And I was very impressed by the simplicity of his personality, the unpretentiousness. How probably some of you, how grand and well developed and well thought of his ideas are over many, many years of dedicated work. How much knowledge, and not just knowledge, but wisdom there is in them. But the man is having this way of very tolerantly expressing and explaining his ideas, being very open to anyone and anything that may be interested. So discussing scientific statistical astrology, for example, he is saying, yeah, there are people out there right now that are trying to put astrology into a frame which is more academically acceptable, so that we can in one way or another justify it. But the question is whether this is necessary in the first place. Because if you explore it further, you start understanding that it is in a category on its own in one way or another, and doesn't necessarily have to comply with what modern day science, but at the end of the day, astrology is a kind of science as well, even though it's a special kind which cannot be even statistically that way justified. It is just an attempt, all these things, to put it in another context. And in short, he's a little bit skeptical and hesitant in how much this deserves attention. But a lot has been achieved in lately from the days of at the time when in the early 19th century they started making those statistical analyses and comparisons of what happens if, for example, this experiment that never really took place, and Rudhyar is mentioning, for example, people born on the same day at the same time in the same place, to be followed through the duration of their life and to see whether we can find parallels in the different choices, the different events that the birth chart kind of presupposed for them. But eventually, statistical averages, Rudhyar says, don't deal with individual people. And it is the power of the free will of the individual people mixing the chart potentials with the free will and the choices we all make, and the environmental conditions that produce the final effect. So at the end of the day, we cannot have a reliable statistic. The statistic happens to equal everybody under very general human categories, but where the power of this whole study is in being able to use the knowledge that we have of the chart to make very individual decisions and stir the direction of our circumstances in a completely different direction. Then there is another approach linking astrology with esoteric and occult doctrines. This is also quite fashionable lately. And again, a lot of interesting details can be found there, parallels, synchronicities. If you are working with clients and you are integrating some of those practices, this can add value, this can add more understanding to, say, the analysis of the case. But at the end of the day, what Rudhyar points out is that astrology is a symbolical language, which is more than anything else there to reveal the hidden order or the gradually revealing order as we study it behind apparent chaos that we struggle with in our everyday lives and in our psychological development as well. So this is the kind of astrology that we are going to be exploring in the next steps. Now, I have selected several quotes from the book for you. Some are from this particular book, others are not, but they are following that same message. And starting with this one, astrology is a technique for the gaining of wisdom through the understanding of the order in human nature and in all phenomena perceived by men, a technique in understanding. So this is what has always attracted me as someone that's very prone to psychologizing and analyzing people's nature and how things work out, and kind of trying to delve deep and find as some sort of an investigator of human psyche, what lies beyond the visible and the superficial. And I have been very attracted to studying astrology so I can gain a tool of understanding. Maybe you do too. And Rudhyar is saying that basically this is the highest possible expression that he can think of as a purposeful application of what we are learning. And it can be transformative and it can be empowering. So everything that we learn as specific techniques is devised and kind of designed to lead us into a perception of an order behind chaos. Because ever since antiquity, people were starting to develop their knowledge and to gather information about the periodicity of events in the sky that they have been observing, or the cycles of the light, the moon and the sun, for example, in order to perceive the repetition of the patterns that at the end of the day make us see that things follow a prescribed order that make them a little bit predictable, at least, or a little bit kind of meaningful, more than just experiencing here and there different crises and points of stress that may be extremely destructive and discouraging if we're not making sense of them. So before we go to the points of the book itself, I wanted to give you this outline of probably the chief idea behind everything that Rudhyar is revolving around in all of his works. And not just his astrological studies, because you know that he's a very diverse individual, diverse author, that during his life has produced a lot of work related not just to astrology. He was not an astrologer in this direct meaning of the word. He was foremost a philosopher, also a musician, a composer. He actually started his path by composing very ahead of its time avant-garde music that was very well perceived in the beginning, but then his path was disturbed by mostly world events, the war in the beginning of the 20th century, just after he moved to the United States in very young age. And he shifted his direction to theosophy initially, where he found a lot of the initial ideas, even though he was never a member of the Theosophical Society. He stresses that very much in many of his writings. He was not really a theosophist. He was just curious and interested in many of those esoteric studies that were starting to get into the Western world from the East in the 20th century. And he made lots of connections to different people, including Mark Edmund Jones, the one that introduced the Sabian symbols, and in a way introduced Rudhyar to basic astrological knowledge, from which he took it on and started rethinking the concepts and connecting them to other practices. Especially, he's very influenced by Carl Jung and depth psychology and many others, Roberto Assagioni. And this is not, I'm not going to go too much into it at the moment, but you can read in Caldea.com the short biography of Rudhyar to go through the different stages. And also you can see how he developed those initial contexts from the beginning. But a lot of the work is very original, and original as a concept, as a pioneering direction, because he kind of sensed that astrology could be reframed, could be rethought in a way to be more in line, in tune with what the new development of mankind as a whole, especially in this very special moment when the three transpersonal planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, had already been discovered. And we had started discovering realms of existence and experience that old-time people and astrologers just weren't in touch to. And here I wanted to look at the distinction between event-oriented and person-centered or humanistic. So person-centered and humanistic astrology are interchangeable names that can be used. And here it is. In the event-oriented astrology, which is the mass astrology most popular everywhere, even now, and to which more or less Rudhyar is trying to provide an alternative, is not a specific technique. It's not, for example, how to calculate the chart, which house system to use, or whether to select particular ancient techniques and not others, whether to use modern rulers or ancient rulers. This is not the point. The point is something else. Everything to do with event orientation that is kind of automatically accepted as a default mode of thinking today, and not only in astrology, but also in other studies, is that there is this constant battle of forces, one against the other, that we as people are individuals that are somehow external to everything else that's going on in the world. And what happens to us is a direct attack, or maybe sometimes something beneficial and helpful. But ultimately, it all falls into categories of positive and negative. So looking at the birth chart, we are looking at it as something external to us that we need to somehow overcome, or to understand in order to win over, or to kind of get into the meaning of our stars so that we can be smarter or wiser and shift them in directions that we want to shift them. And this is presupposing a division. So the person is not part of the chart. This way of thinking is stressing dualities in this very divisive way. Everything is good or bad, good aspects or bad aspects. A transit that is going to hit you and cause something negative or positive. But we are thinking as if we are some sort of victim, presupposed victim, a subject to external forces, forces of the environment or forces of some place that we cannot really understand if we are going into an esoteric direction, for example, or even the symbols in the astrological chart and the motions of the planets, which we somehow perceive are directly affecting us. Yes, scientific and statistical studies in astrology are trying to find out physical, real correlations between what goes on in the constant change of arrangement of the positions of the moving bodies in the solar system, for example, and the effect this has on the life on Earth, our life, and more general trends that we can observe. And there is obviously some connection, but astrology as such is not preoccupied, or it shouldn't be preoccupied with the source of that correlation. It is so much more about the meaning that we give to our participation in the whole scheme. So the event-centered astrology is so much about cause and effect. Everything is acting on everything else. And it is causing this very, as he calls it, atomistic view of life, splitting everything into its parts, rather than stepping back and having a wider, more holistic view. So this is what Rudhyar is stressing again and again. How much more useful, how much more helpful and self-empowering it could be if we try to shift our perspective, thinking about the universe as a manifestation of an order, of a harmony, and of something that we are a mini model of in one way or another, if we can imagine it this way. That all the things that the chart is a representation of energies we are all made of, all the same energies, but they are kind of ordered in a different direction, has its purposeful function within the whole system. And that every person is the chart, is not something separate from the chart. But the point then is to look at the specifics there and to try to have some sort of synthesis. So we can realize what is the purpose, what is the direction, what is the best way we can apply out there in practice what the chart is giving more of a recipe of a solution to a problem rather than a problem. Event-oriented astrology looks at the chart as a problem, especially the harder aspects in it, or something that we can, following the standard textbooks, we can perceive as something that's not going to bring us, bringing us from outside. We don't have any participation here. It is the planets are the ones that are acting on us. While the holistic approach of Rudhyar is, by the way, he didn't invent it. This whole way of thinking, but now applying it to astrology, has its parallels in holistic psychology that more or less started being popular at the same time that he developed his ideas, and many other authors. So it's not that original, but it just hasn't been applied to astrology in such a comprehensive way before he really started working on those ideas one by one and breaking them down. So synchronicity, this not cause and effect direction of correlation between the sky, the different arrangements of positions of planets and bodies in the sky that are constantly in motion. So because they're in constant motion, they constantly give us another picture of the universe. And every one moment has its own energetic pattern that in a non-direct way is somehow being reflected in everything else that acts and exists in that same moment. And everything that we will be doing by getting into the specifics then from now on will be hopefully from this point of view of let's see what's the common denominator between all the factors and not concentrate into something taken out of context and being extremely specific, like is the norm usually. And in that view, I really like what Rudhyar was saying in one of those audio lectures, that he's not very keen to comment on a chart that is just being presented, and he asked for a comment. So the question is, he says, who does this chart belong to? What's the context? Who is the person? Because yes, we can have this intellectual exercise of trying to guess different trends, and maybe we will be able to extract a lot of specific information from that, and it will be fun, it will be interesting. In any case, a very dynamic intellectual exercise that would be. But what's the point at the end of the day if we're not able to connect it with the life of whoever we are dealing with? Or it could be an event, it could be an organization, it could be something else, it's not necessarily a person, because you know that everything that is being born in a particular moment and somehow has the stamp of the condition of the universe in that particular moment is very reflective of those energies that were ordered in that particular way then. So yes, I kind of spent too much on this, but this is probably the most important starting point, trying over time to get this concept of event-oriented against person-centered humanistic astrology more and more, and always have it at the back of our minds while we then start learning our specifics and applying them to practice. Now, the first step is to understand the nature and purpose of what one is about to study. And here is a quote from Rudhyar again. Every student, however casual his study, should ask honestly to himself, what does astrology mean to me? What is my aim in becoming better acquainted with it? Maybe you're already thinking, why all the philosophizing? What's the point here? I think it is worth spending at least one meeting on more general questions like this, because they are missing, and we are very often prone to jumping into the chart or whatever, a technique or something that is, easy to play with and more concrete. But these are fundamental things, fundamental questions, because I think every one of us, even if you're not an astrologer, and if you're not really having a professional practice where there is this major responsibility of having other people come to you, sharing their lives, their experiences, their struggles, even if you're just sharing a few basic things with your friend over coffee, but you're still imparting very interesting, mystical for them, you're stirring their curiosity in a way that presupposes that you need to know why you're doing it and how far you want to get into this, because it can have enormous effects on the other person. So, especially when we want to dedicate ourselves even more to it, it is important to ask, and I have written down a few words just for myself some time ago when I was first reading that book, trying to answer that question. Why am I into this? What is this responding to in my own personality? How exactly am I planning to be helpful with this? Do I want to share knowledge generally with the wider public? Do I want to work more with people one-to-one? Do I want to write articles and publish them somewhere? Do I want to take a more scientific approach and do some statistical studies so that I can try to see how particular aspects work in general? or something else? What is it really that I want to achieve? Or is it sometimes, I think too often, it is a case that not just through astrology, but it's just, the tool, it's just the subject, where people can exercise their desire to appear very smart, appear very knowledgeable just for the sake of knowledge itself, and to somehow compete in a way that is not very well thought of, again, through the knowledge, through the data, but without really thinking very hard and deep about the application of that knowledge. So a quick reminder here, as part of this first step, is that astrology is a study of an observable parallelism between the timing of events in the universe and in the individual consciousness. So I already touched on this a little bit, but Rudhyar is making this distinction between astronomy and astrology, even though we take, as astrologers, all of our data and all of our information on which we base our analyses and everything that we calculate is based on astronomical tables and knowledge and positions and calculations and so on. So we need astronomy as a base, but astronomy is the science that is trying to explain the behavior of different things in the solar system, for example, or in the universe in general, this observable phenomena, and to kind of connect them, see, maybe it is really the subject of astronomy to find the link. One day people may find a more definitive link between the actual mechanism of how these things affect us here on Earth, how we are all subject, not just as a whole planet, but as individuals. What's really the connection there? Is it electromagnetic fields? Is it other forces? What kind of forces they are exactly? That's the subject of astronomy. Astrology is explaining the meaning of those things, the meaning behind the connections, and looking into this more symbolical correlation that doesn't always require the scientific explanation behind it to be helpful and to be clarifying. So then all of these things are things that you can go deeper into in a lot of the books that Rudhyar has wrote elsewhere, like Person-Centered Astrology, for example. He talks a lot about the distinction between a single organism and organic wholes. So here is just to say that we are all organisms, and there are many kinds of organisms, as long as they are independent entities existing, in a more or less predictable way, and following a certain pattern of being born, then developing gradually over life, going through different crises and different turning points, and then eventually reaching a particular end point. But organic wholes are then those bigger groups of entities, like a nation, a political party, it could be, or a business, where many different things are together in a structure, in a interconnected pattern, and they all affect one another because the whole that they create is then giving back its energies to the individual that's part of it, and he or she or it is being changed by that. And the other way around, the individual organisms are particles of the whole that participate in it. They change its structure over time. If any of the elements is somehow eccentric or innovative or out of the ordinary, it may change the face and the course of the whole system, but at the same time, it is subject to it. So this is the idea of this mutual dependency, hierarchical in one way or another, but not hierarchical in a way that one thing is better or greater than the other and the other one is lesser, but that almost like parallel idea to Russian dolls, where each one, it constitutes at another level the wholeness of the whole. So very often you'll see examples with the human body, for example, how the different parts of the human body all have a different function within the wholeness of the organism. but they cannot exist without it, without being part of that organization of the organism. You can have your arm or your leg doing something without being part of the self-regulating, organism of the body. And at the same time, it doesn't make sense, neither of these functions on its own. But the body as a whole cannot exist without any one of them being there and playing its part. So looking at things from that perspective, I know it's very philosophical, but why can't we imagine that we are a part of a scheme which is having a very particular point in that scheme? It is very we are limited by what we are, by the potentials we have, by our genetics, in the same way as we can say that the birth chart is the psychological genetics, the mental, the psychic things that we are born with and somehow are given to us from the beginning as a potential way of operating. So we only have a certain amount of them ordered in a particular way. We can't have everything and be everything, but at the same time we have a place, and this place is very specific and very needed. So the quote here says that what is meant by structure is always the more or less permanent results of the workings of a particular of a principle of organization. It refers to the web of relationships within the limits of the organic whole, to the place occupied by the various organs within this whole, to the schedule of their joint operations. So this leads us to the next one, which I thought you may want to see, because it's beautiful to realize this particularly, that structure in space is form, structure in time is rhythm. The full and perfect form is the sphere, and the complete rhythm manifests as the cycle. So the cycle of the planets, the cycle of everything in the universe that revolves around, comes back to the same place where the starting point was, but maybe at a new level, never really the same, following the same structural pattern, but the contents of that pattern are always different. As Rudhyar says in other places, spring always comes every year. It is the same season, the same idea, the same experience in its overall greater perspective. But the flowers, the plants, the natural expression of this new spring, these are new entities there. These are it is new life that hasn't been there before. It's a new exercise in the same overall picture. So what was interesting for me to realize is that the body, for example, as a physical organism, has this very developed in people self-restoring capacity. When we get ill, somehow something unconscious in us that we can't really follow as a process self-regulates and tries to restore order, to restore health in one way or another. But that's not the case with the psyche. Maybe it will be after some time, after some more evolution takes place in humanity. I don't know, but our psyche doesn't recuperate in the same way. And that's why it's not so uncommon that we are all quite confused. We are all quite very often depressed, maybe by different experiences, and taken off balance, taken off our equilibrium of being able to operate in a good way. We have good days, bad days. We very often fall from different periods of being either very sharp-minded and effective and curious to others where we don't want to be bothered. And it is so fragile, it seems, the psyche, and very easily disturbed. So astrology and this framework of seeing things and trying to perceive the structure behind events, the overall pattern, the more holistic, from a distance, almost like using a telescope instead of a microscope perspective, could be really helpful. And I hope you're going to see examples of this as we go along, and as we in the next few weeks as well, where I won't be going back to those principles again, but we would be hopefully having them in mind when we look at things that are more concrete and see whether they can be one piece of a puzzle that by working from that perspective, we can kind of have a bit of consolation as well, seeing the chart as a whole pattern, as a picture that reveals itself. And then the subject matter of astrology, again, as part of this first step, is really this personal or collective experience of human beings is the focus. So analyzing what is the question. And it usually, to be effective, has to be focused on something that's maybe not only a particular person, but something that is to do with human affairs as such, and how they can be led in a more conscious way. What are you saying here? The basic purpose of astrology is to bring order to the apparent chaos of man's experience, and thus help the individual or the group to achieve a greater degree of integration, health, and sanity, which is really what I was trying to explain earlier. Another point of this same subject matter focus is how we can work, and this has so much to do with Carl Jung's concept of individuation. If you are studying Jungian psychology, it's not exactly the same, but I think Rudhyar is kind of saying, yeah, that's really the direction, but here is the tool, and astrology is such a powerful, specific tool. I don't know if you have found anything more specific, if you're interested in other esoteric studies or other disciplines or whatever else you may be doing, but I personally haven't found anything so far which is so, by breaking down into very specific person-centered, things, the chart, let's say, nobody else has the same chart, nobody else lives the chart in the same circumstances. It's so specific, but at the same time, the more you look at it, the more you can see the overall big pattern behind it. And this is giving this sense of freedom within constraints, because at the end of the day, we can be free even though we are constrained within the limits of these particular energies. And this next quote is saying, free will is the measure of a man's capacity to be and act as an individual. Fate is the measure of his dependence upon collective and generic standards as determining structures. So studying the chart by trying to uncover the main idea of how to apply myself in the best possible way, let's say, in the most effective way, in the most not only self-fulfilling way, in a hedonistic manner that's just for my own gratification, but so that I can be integrated in the scheme of things. And for this whole thing to make sense, it is empowering because then it focuses on something that you can use to lead your own path instead of, without this information, being very easily directed by the mass trends. And we can see, I can see a lot of that going on in the world at the moment. We live in such times that this is exacerbated. It's a crisis point. And without really judging what is right or wrong, what I believe is probably the wiser direction in one thing or another, generally, I think you would agree there is so much chaos. And this chaos is not that external, it's more internal. It's more not knowing what to believe in, not knowing how to orient yourself in the big picture, and having this anxiety and a sense of being lost, which could be helped a lot by studying your own chart and the one of other people or other things, mundane astrology as well, the chart of processes, the chart of trends, and discovering that everything is actually very consistent and very much the way it is supposed to be. And this gives peace and meaning. Then, step 2. very important, and that's probably the one I actually concentrate on the most. And this thing is missing. Nobody's talking about this, and let's try to maybe discuss it later. To assume personal responsibility for the use of one's knowledge. And the quote is, wisdom is based on usable knowledge and on the purposeful use of it. Okay, well, are we not so often in a very big hurry? And actually, when I think about it, we have been doing this mostly in the last year in the group. Here in our meetings, every time we were thinking, so what would be the next topic of our events? The next technique or the next specific that we want to, exchange knowledge about and see how we can apply that knowledge and see, say, for example, the chart of a famous person. Or we were going into a direction very contradictory, actually, to what Rudhyar is, trying to give us as advice, without saying that we shouldn't work on charts or just the contrary. This is the whole point of eventually getting there. But before we start accumulating all this data and open the big books and start memorizing, knowing our stuff really as astrologers, which we have to be able to do in order to be good in our work. But before that, we need to think about whether we can actually put in practice the thing that we've learned, whether we can apply it in the right moment for the right person, because people that come to you, they are at different stages of their life. They have different things that they're dealing with at this particular moment. Maybe they would have some use of some of those, myriad of things that you have accumulated as specific things in your head, but not others. So how to be selective? It is really necessary to be selective and to be thinking first, okay, what do I want to achieve here? Do I want to make this person feel better just because they're extremely stressed out in this moment? Do I want to give them a piece of knowledge that then they can take and apply to something in their own way? Do I want to give clarification and explain a misconception that they have fallen into, which is very often the case? Or what? What exactly am I trying to do? So from here, he leads us to this assertion that knowledge comes with responsibility, or responsibility comes with knowledge. I don't know which way around, but they are very intertwined. The moment you know more than others do, you cannot escape the responsibility. Sometimes we have to remain silent and realize that either it is not the time to share what we're so eager to share, especially if we're beginners. We're so enthusiastic by how amazed we are by astrology working and revealing and giving explanations and giving a sense of order and being so somehow in a mesmerizing way responding to our call, that we are too hurriedly stepping into another person's territory and imposing our knowledge. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has given those long lectures on the meanings of the planets or the meanings of the signs to everyone I go out for coffee with, or my family, or somebody, just a stranger. That's definitely not a good practice, because yes, you can stir the interest, you can give something valuable, yeah, they can take away from you, and you can learn, because actually, I suppose what we're trying to do in these initial moments is to practice our own approaches and our own knowledge to test it a little bit, to see how it works. Not to mention the great deal of curiosity, which is often crossing the line and disturbing the privacy of the other person. Asking everyone around their birth data. Well, okay, well, we need that. We need a lot of birth data, a lot of different examples in order to practice and to be better and to see patterns better and better as time passes. But we need to be careful what we're doing, because here Rudhyar says, modern man is a person who uses indiscriminately the products of a knowledge of which he has no vital and human understanding, and the fundamental purpose and ultimate value of which he does not even question. Modern man is interested in technique first and last. How to use the tools of knowledge after an easy course of training, how to get quick results in terms of effective operation and application. This is all that counts for him. So, yes, I think it's just good to remind ourselves about this every now and then, because that doesn't apply just to astrology. You can be a medical doctor, or you can be a psychologist that doesn't use astrology, for example, like a traditionally trained psychologist. You can be a counselor or an advisor in another role. Doesn't matter. If we're not mindful about when, how, and in what way we share the knowledge, whether the person on the other side is actually capable of assimilating what we're saying. Maybe if you have a 17-year-old, you would share a certain part of the chart as information, or you would stress different things that you think may be helpful in that moment of life for that person. The same person can come to you at 50 years old, and they have the same chart still, even though progressions and transits would then be revealing another stage and another point of maybe dealing with something difficult at that moment. But it is the same person with the same chart. Now our approach needs to be different, because the moment of interpretation is something that not many astrologers are talking about or thinking about. I try to spend several moments at least before somebody comes for a consultation, because most of the time, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information about the person. It is mostly strangers that go to astrologers for advice. That it's not long established relationship with a friend or with a relative that you have a lot of background information about how the chart has come alive already in their life, which aspects of it they worked with more or expressed more, and which ones were more problematic. You don't really know the story behind the person, and questions need to be asked. But there is this intuition that we need to use, maybe also with trying to extract a few key things about at what stage of their life and their development, because you can have a very young person that's very spiritually, let's say, more prepared, more attuned, in one way or another, more capable of understanding a slightly more, let's say, high concepts, or I don't know how to explain it, or something that's more complex in a way. While another person, even older, could be operating at a very basic level and facing very everyday challenges, just not being ready yet to jump into a more holistic, say, view of himself or herself. And then you need to be more specific, still trying to give an idea of the important perspective of not dividing everything and not being fatalistic in our view, but at the same time see how much could be understood. Because what is the point of like some of my very early consultations? I still have the recordings of them, and quite ashamed of how I conducted them, because in my desire to demonstrate to the client how knowledgeable I am, or how well I know my stuff, and how many techniques, how this thing actually works. Because we, despite maybe now overcoming more and more this general negative reputation that astrology still has out there among people that actually don't know anything about it, but it is what it is, and for a good reason in most cases. But sometimes we have this feeling of, now this person comes to me and I need to break the ice. I need to somehow convince them first that I know what I'm doing, that I'm not a charlatan, that I'm not somebody that's just I don't know, looking at the crystal ball or something like this, which is sometimes associated with it still. And we overdo it in our attempt to be really good. we very often overdo it, and we say more than was necessary. Or sometimes, because we really cannot escape the responsibility, as Rudhyar says, sometimes we say too little, because silence can also be detrimental if you, on the other hand, hadn't stepped in to maybe introduce something to someone around you that you see needs it. Maybe you misjudged it, or you were not convinced that you would be able to do a good job in sharing the knowledge, or something else stopped you. But many times I've seen a commentary by Rudhyar in many places, which is kind of ringing back in my mind that most problems in this world are a result of unfinished business, of something that we haven't actually lived through to the end in a way that, in fact, we haven't been responsible to the person or to the situation. So there is no right answer. There is no formula here. And it's all down to the judgment of the astrologer or the person that's working with this even a little bit. And here's the other quote: to impart knowledge without caring to discover whether or not this knowledge is assimilatable by those to whom it is given, and whether once assimilated it will have a sporting chance to be conducive to personal or group integration, is to fail to assume responsibility for that knowledge. It is to follow the way of the intellect, not the path of wisdom. It is to divorce analytical thinking from integral living, intellectuality from moral values, the brain from the heart. So ultimately, it's, I think, maybe a simple message. Bear in mind that astrology is not just about the brain, but also about the heart, and try to use it in those both, intertwined ways when working with people. Then part of this line of like how to be responsible, how to be not just knowledgeable, but also concentrated on the other, the one that we're helping, is this question of astrology and fear. And fear here is the fear of the client, basically, the fear of the person that most often comes to us or is seeking information to other sources. Because we know that a very particular state of mind or emotion often triggers the desire to open up to something that's not common knowledge. Astrology is not common knowledge, very often not safe knowledge in the eyes of people that are not familiar with it. It is a step into the darkness in one way or another. They're risking something. They are revealing themselves. They are looking for answers. And what most astrologers I can see don't realize is that when somebody calls you for a consultation or wants to discuss something, it's not just out of curiosity. It's not just out of maybe wanting to pick up your brain a little bit, the actual knowledge about how to read a chart or whatever else. There is always something more going on. Most of the time, that's not admitted, because most of the time, even the person doesn't know that they are struggling. They're struggling with usually changes. And because we all, would rather lead a very calm, predictable life, which is not very often disturbed by major changes and major crises. But unfortunately, it turns out that it's one overall process of crisis after crisis coming that we just need to face as a normal thing, as a normal process. But there is so much resistance to that and so much fear. So part of this responsibility that we all have is to realize that we need to be very careful what words we choose and to care to come into a relationship with this other person, to be allowed to learn something about ourselves Here comes this concept of transference and countertransference in psychology, especially discussed by Jung, that we are also affected by the consultation. It's not just the person that comes to us, that we may be disturbed too. Our complexes, our fears, our own crises that are going in the background in our own life also have something to do with their presence there in this moment. And you can tell me, has it happened to you, and is it happening? Because it is in my case all the time, that I can see a link, a very obvious link, between the person that is coming in a particular time for consultation, their chart, their stage of life, let's say, their transits and progressions to that point, and something that I'm going through in my life in that moment. Sometimes it's very simple. It's to do with what I'm reading about recently. So if I have been concentrating on Chiron, for example, and studying Chiron in the chart, next week comes somebody that has a very prominent Chiron, and say a Chiron return or something else related to Chiron. That's really, when I've looked through the whole chart, I could single out as a very pronounced focal point. And in other cases, it's simply to do with, I struggle with something in my own life, maybe subconsciously. I'm not giving it out enough attention. And through the problem and the crisis of somebody else, I am being somehow provoked to pay attention to this. In the same way, it is my job as a counselor to help the other person to pay attention to this particular thing that is now being stressed in their life, and to give them a meaningful roadmap to kind of just point the direction without, of course, giving any ready answers, because there are no shortcuts and no ready answers here. We are very often tempted to give them, to try to give a prediction, to try to give a more detailed, say, event thing that we say we expect, or we say is a direct influence. This thing of the planets having a direct influence very often slips through our lips, even when we are more humanistically, let's say, oriented as astrologers. But it's inevitable. We are learning with practice. Let's look at the quote quickly. Fear is born of lack of understanding, but even more of a feeling of inadequacy. One fears any confrontation to the facing of which one feels unequal, or for which one believes oneself, rightly or wrongly, to be unprepared. Man is constantly faced by the possibility of becoming greater than he is, and most of the time he shrinks from taking the steps ahead, because he lacks self-confidence and feels inferior to the task or the opportunity, or because he is too attached to his last success and his established happiness. So, yes, there is a lot of resistance, and sometimes it's none of our business to try to disturb the perceived order and happiness of someone by, trying to convince them that they're not seeing reality the way it is, or they, kind of imposing the tools when they're not being asked for. In other cases, we just need to be aware of how fragile the person is, and not misuse our authority. And that's the next step, really. Being able to assume authority. Actually, that's coming on the next slide, but here a quick note about fortune telling. The usual culprit here is the astrologer using the knowledge for fortune telling. And sometimes this can be slightly excused, even though you know how destructive it could be, because these same fears that I discussed now are the ones that could be extremely exaggerated by us. And the person can leave our house, office, whatever, Zoom meeting, many times more afraid, many times more confused, and expecting something that we have, let's say, pronounced a probability for. Say we have said there is a certain chance that this and this may come out, which very often could be worse than knowing for sure that it is going to happen or not going to happen. But so few of us actually think about this. So my whole point today is trying to shout it out once, just this time, and see whether we can just have a think about it. And here Rudhyar says, even in honest hands and where no monetary transaction is involved, the dangers of fortune telling are that it is based on the wrong type of psychology, that it singles out for consideration standard matters most likely to impress people's curiosity or vanity, and that it does not seek to contribute to the health or psychological wholeness of the client. Fortune telling tends to encourage dependence upon external advice and escapism. Above all, dependence upon external events which are presented as unrelated to the integral life and being of the client. So, even if we demonstrate the possibility of determining something for sure through the tools that we have, we are not giving any favor to anyone doing that, because say if the person is not aware of what are the different ways of applying astrology and so on, the mere demonstration that something like that is possible, and it is to some extent possible, not as much as real fortune tellers claim it to be, of course, then I think we are kind of spoiling the person in a way. We are giving a formula which is promoting the idea that you can fight life, or you are again a subject of some external force. You are not the self-empowered individual that determines the rules of the game, and upon whom at the end of the day it depends to make decisions and to choose how to respond to everything that's happening. So that leads us to step 3, the last one. I'm not keeping any, any look at time. I don't know where we are. Let's just take a look quickly. That's fine. It's not a lot more left before we start talking just generally. And I'll give you the word, but here is step 3, to establish a clear procedure of work. So that follows it. Now we have taken the time to think about why we want to study astrology, in what way we want to apply it, and what's really the matter of it, what it is its subject, and so on. We have then been responsible enough to realize how much of a weight we carry on our shoulders by taking upon ourselves to give advice based on astrology. And now, to really be able to do the job to the full, we have to study the actual techniques. And here you have a choice. In our meetings in the last year on Thursdays, I wanted to see what everybody does. We had Gaurav with us, for example, who is a Vedic astrologer. He presented one time. Thank you, Gaurav, for that. You introduced us in a completely different world of, how to, by trying to do these things that I already talked about, we can use your system. If that's what attracts us. That's got nothing to do with what Rudhyar actually used, but that's all right. We can use esoteric astrology. We can use traditional astrology. They all have their limits. And the problem, let's say, in inverted commas, problem with most of those other techniques is that they, in one or a few of their aspects, just cannot respond to those requirements that we already said. Because either they're too event-oriented, they're too prediction-oriented, or they, but of course, we can use the technique and shift it around and not actually make predictions, not actually, follow the common way, but follow some sort of, let's say, more psychological way. It could be modern psychological astrology, which is not exactly the range of techniques that then Rudhyar breaks down into his studies. It is a lot of it, but there are some differences. For example, if you read Les Green, Howard Sportis, Stephen Arroyo, Stephen Forrest, you would see a lot of things adopted from Rudhyar directly, but developed in a different direction. For example, Liz Green is so much more about mythology and other things. Stephen Forrest has really developed the concepts of evolutionary astrology, which I love as well. So my point is, it's not that much about the technique, but at the same time it is, because I think we all need to sit down and carefully think about our choice of techniques. What house system am I going to use and why? What is going to be my approach to the houses? What is the meaning of the houses to me? Because then I'm going to present it all and I'm going to kind of analyze it all through that perspective. What do I understand by the zodiac? Which zodiac? Why this one and not the other? And I think we need to have our own reasons and to be able to tell the person that comes to us why we have chosen to work the way we have. And also, we need to try to be comprehensive in our knowledge. Because if you're missing an important part of the picture, you're not doing, a favor neither to yourself nor to the client. You're just stripping away some of the tools that would make you more effective, would make you quicker, would make you wiser, even because you would be able to perceive more in the chart than if you haven't done your homework. So from here onwards, we are starting to get into the actual pieces that we astrologers use as information and on which we base our analysis and our, even predictions, let's say, or kind of overview of what's going on in that particular situation. Now the quote, the astrological chart is more than a formula, more than a map. It is not something merely to be studied with a cold analytical intellect. It is something to be felt. It should be felt as the living symbol of the whole universe, seen from a particular place at a particular time. So here is another great difference between Rudhyar's methods and those of other schools, let's say, those of other authors. He really stresses this individual factor of not only like the time of birth, how this determines the order of the chart and the distribution of the houses, for example, but also the place on the surface of the earth, let's say the place where the person is born. It's all very person-centered. So it needs to be registered, that information. It needs to be taken into account. Based on that, because presumably we are the one experiencing the universe at that particular moment of birth. And then the way the whole picture affects us is going to affect us in a particular way. Say if we're born in the United States, in a different way if we're born in Asia, in Africa, in another place. The location is very important because we have a different view of the physical sky and the way things are ordered there in the sky at this particular moment of birth. So from here comes the great stress of Rudhyar to the houses. The houses are this space factor. I will tell you more about this. I won't be going into specifics today. Next time, when we're going to go through houses, signs, and planets, more specifically. But here, I think the quote is more to do with not just blindly analyzing the data, whatever data we're using, but also trying to look at the chart in an intuitive way, because a lot of what can be perceived from it is having this intuitive basis. And I'm not sure whether intuitive is really the right word, but what he compares this with is the reading of a musical score by a musician. And I really love this example because Rudhyar is saying that for a lot of us astrologers, the chart is like a score. It is actually, but we are thinking that the music is the score, that the life of the person is the actual chart. Well, actually, that's not the case. You know how different musicians, for example, will perform the same score in a completely different way. They would give it different emotion, different, their own character in one way or another. So there is this factor of responding and reading and feeling the music. So this is something that there are no rules invented how to do that. I guess some people are naturally more talented in this, while others are not. But at the end of the day, we're all limited. But it is part of the whole picture. The chart has to be felt, not just interpreted. Now, the birth moment, which I already slightly touched on. Again, he says the birth moment is the moment when the baby takes its first breath. And this first breath, that's how we determine the time of birth. It's not just when, physically the baby was separated from the mother. More importantly, it's the moment when the baby takes its first individual action. And that individual action, like in a response to the environment, is this taking of the first breath. Rudhyar also says that, actually, biologically, the whole circulation of the blood changes at that moment of the baby as well, because that it becomes an independent system centered in the baby and not connected anymore to the mother. So something, this is really the starting point of the chart, the starting point of the pattern that the chart is, and which we can use as a blueprint, as a, let's say, maybe architectural drawing. We can imagine it in that way of how this thing could be a non-physical thing that is being born in that moment, is supposed to develop over the course of its life. What's the best way? What's the most efficient way? But this is only a recommendation. Now, let's go back to the birth moment, because I'm getting diverted a bit. Astrology has been rightly called the science of all beginnings by Mark Jones, because it is based primarily on the study of the seed structure of the potentialities of life and growth may manifest in the first moment of any cycle of organic activity. So the birth chart is a registration we make on paper in 2D format. So far, only that. Maybe in the future there'll be 3D charts as well, which I'm looking forward to. But it's a limited, kind of selective information. I thought I had that somewhere about the selectivity of the information, but no. So we pick up out of all the astronomical data that we have on our disposal, only certain factors: the planets, the moving planets, maybe some asteroids, other factors in the universe, but they are not everything and anything that's out there, but focal points. And we're using that to construct the chart. Once we have the chart, on which it is mapped out where all those bodies were located at the moment of the birth, this is giving a model of presumed development of that seed. And the comparison with the plant is very helpful to imagine what this is all about. Like in our chart, we can see what kind of plant we are meant to be. Is it a cherry tree? Is it an apple tree? Is it an oak? What is it? As a generic structure, as a total limited in its kind, in its kind of species, let's say, this is the limit. But then within that, this organism can grow in many different ways. For example, the transits. This is just a short, very, very quick interjection into something that's coming later. But the transits are telling us how during the course of life of that organism, of that plant, external factors can affect its development or will affect its development. For some of these plants, that can happen very early on. Something very stressful can be, kind of imposed on them from the outside right in the beginning of their development. Maybe they won't survive it because it's so strong. Others are going to a crisis point from outside, a transit, later on. So with everyone, the schedule of operation is different. Progressions are making things extremely personal. It's another technique of following through the gradual development of that seed, which is just about that seed. It's not about all of its kind. It's extremely personalized. I'm sure probably some of you won't grasp this at the moment if you haven't studied progressions and transits deeply. But I hope that will come clear later. There will be a special 1 week I'm planning to dedicate just on transits and progressions to see how Rudhyar is explaining them, and what he wants to stress out is really the key of the two techniques. So yeah, I think maybe it is also important to mention here that everything in the chart is potential only. There is nothing fatalistic in it. Nothing determines 100% what is going to happen. Again, going back to the analogy of the plant, that this is pretty much all we know, that at a certain stage of its development, at a certain age, for example, as we have our Saturn return at 30, our Uranus return at 42, things like this are generic. They're for everyone. If you are a human being, you are going to go through this kind of crisis at this age of your life. And from that point of view, we astrologers have a clue. We already know, only by the age of the clients, what they may be going through. We don't even need to look at the chart. But then there are other things, of course, that point us into the schedule of development. Now, what exactly is going to happen? We never know, and we can never know. There is no way for astrology to clarify there are statistically better and worse guesses. Some techniques that are more prediction oriented may achieve very good results, and really by following a particular transit or combination of transits or whatever, they can maybe be able to be more specific. But let's think about this. The more common people we are, kind of not individuated people we are, the more predictable we are. Because most likely, having what we have in our box of energies, same energies for everyone, but mixed in a different way, revealed by the chart, it is very easy usually to predict how this person is going to act when the next crisis comes. If you are seeing a major Pluto transit coming in 2 years, and you see what house this is falling into, you may be able to be very specific about what is going to go wrong, for example. And then again, we come back to the question, so what? What's the point of knowing, and what's the point of sharing? Is it not the most important thing to guide of how to respond to it in the best possible way, and to see where that thing fits in the whole picture, in the whole schedule, how it could be related to things that happened to that person 10 years ago or 15 years ago, or will be coming in the future eventually, as major points of growth, so they can then use it and see it as meaningful, necessary, and maybe unpleasant as an experience, but still something that they can turn around into a positive outcome. Then, okay, the elements of the birth chart are the elements of our language, the language of astrology that we all use. And this is Rudhyr's chart, by the way, just as an example. I could have used any chart so that we can visualize very quickly this, again, very selective 2D model of the sky that we are stuck into so far, where we have the information we need. The houses, the sectors into which the chart is divided, this is to do with the horizon. Now, this is now technical for astrologers, but it's just to mention it because it's one of those things that we need to, if you haven't studied well, and if you have any doubts that you may not understand all of this yet, just go in your own time and research it. Because my only message here is these things are, as he advises, the important major bits that we need to have in our arsenal. Really deeply understand the houses, how they're calculated, how do we come to dividing the circle exactly in that way? What's the difference between the house systems, and making our conscious choice which house system we want to use, not only because we kind of like how it looks, or one is easier than the other, or something like that, but when we go into how with what principles it's being calculated. Is it dividing the space around the person, and that's how we get the houses, or is it more the time it takes the sun to go from one place to another, say from the ascendant to the IC, and that's how we divide the first to third house. there are many ways, many techniques out there. So what is related to the houses in astrology is the horizon, the visible horizon from any point on Earth, the space around the person, and the period of the day. So the period of the day, the sidereal day, as they call it, the 24 hours almost, is during which, in one rotation of the Earth, we can see the whole sky surrounding the Earth. So basically, we travel through different views, and this is really part of the division of space around us. So the moving of the ascendant, the start of the first house, and how it changes its position every approximately 2 hours in every single 24-hour day, going through different sectors of the sky. Then the signs of the zodiac and their connection, the zodiac itself, first of all, as a principle, and the signs of the zodiac as, again, divisions of but then divisions of not space, but something else. Again, I won't go into this now, next time. And the fact that the signs are connected to where the sun is positioned in accordance to its usual position at early spring and early autumn. So the equinoxes, at the times of the equinoxes, where do we find the sun at the time of the equinoxes, and then how it appears to be changing its position as we go around it over the year. And then we are seeing different signs of the zodiac, it being in different signs of the zodiac. So that's very scratching the surface. But we need to be aware of the connection of the astronomy behind the astrology here, to be good in what we do and to really kind of have our own then intuitive feeling about it. Maybe sometimes you can invent your own interpretation about a certain factor, especially the new ones, like the asteroids or the fixed stars, whatever, that there isn't so much material out there, or people haven't experimented with and observed long enough yet to really be categorical and say this is what that means. By going to the astronomy and finding what parallels you can make in your own mind into where is this thing in the concept, in the context of everything, and what could that mean? For example, then the next point, the planets. You know that the meaning of the planets is determined by several different factors. One of which is where is every planet located in the order from the sun in the solar system. Also, another factor is its duration of the period it takes to go around the sun. Another factor is the size of the planet, for example. So those things can give us clues, and we really need to be familiar with them. Now, very little bit left. Again, the concept of the horizon and the meridian, and the importance of, if we want to use humanistic astrology and its approach, it is very important, Rudhyar says, to realize that the space factor, again, is extremely important, because it's the individual perception of the person of, the circumstances, the universe, the environment on that moment requires that we chart, almost like the chart is the mandala, a circle. We are at the center of that, at the center of our own existence, and then we equally divide the actual space around us, following the line of the horizon, which is what we visibly see, where the sky and the earth meet, and the line of the meridian, which is the other one, the vertical line, the plumb line, that gives us the point right on top and right in the center, and then goes through the center of the earth downwards. So the chart to be humanistically, person-centeredly framed for Rudhyar means for the horizon and the meridian to always be parallel to one another, for them to then divide the chart into 4 sectors, as we can see here in this model, 4 quadrants they're called, and everything, all the planets, and also the signs of the sectors of the zodiac fall into that frame of reference. So this cross is the cross different incarnation, he calls it in other writings, is the most individual factor in the birth chart. Charting out, setting out, where is the person's horizon, which means ascendant, descendant line, and where is the meridian, MC and IC, and then everything else is framed in that picture. So the true natal horoscope, he says, is a representation of the space around a newborn organism. And the true natal wheel is a two-dimensional projection of that space. Its 12 spokes, the cusps of the houses, cut that space at equal angular intervals. But the zodiacal contents of these 30-degree angles of space are usually not equal. So I know this may be confusing for some of you. And a lot of confusion comes in, lots of questions I see online, or when people discuss. In our group, we also have had this discussion. It's never been possible to me to have the time and the opportunity to really clarify this properly. And I won't do it now. I'll do it next time, really. But very, very simply put, what is equal in the chart is the houses, actually, but it doesn't look like it. I will skip and go back to the chart here. You see how obviously the houses are not equal. We have some houses bigger than others. Well, the signs of the zodiac, this outer wheel where the zodiac is projected, every sign has the same space as any other. So 30 degrees, of course, we know that every sign of the zodiac has 30 degrees. That's fair enough. But it's just the way this chart is projected, the way it's pictured here, is having its focus on the zodiac. So the zodiac is making up the wheel of 360 degrees, which the circle is. So when we divide 360 by 12 signs of the zodiac, we have equal 30-degree steps. But actually, what this chart is really showing us is that here, this line from Sagittarius to Gemini, the horizon line, ascendant, descendant.
Excuse me? Excuse
Yes.
me? I wanted to know, isn't there an intercepted house in there on the second with Aquarius?
Oh, yes, technically, yes. That's another question altogether. That's what happens really when we use one of those space-based systems, one of which is Campanus that Rudhyar recommends a lot, even though he says, I'm not saying that this house system is perfect. He's not saying, I mean. Now I'm using Regium Montanus here, which is very similar to Campanus. What's common between them is that they are dividing the space around the individual in equal sections. And then what happens as a result of that is because the Earth is a globe, and if you live somewhere north, for example, you're not going to see the zodiac, which is like we are observing it as a background from here, from the Earth, but you're not observing it from the northern hemisphere of the Earth as equally divided around you as zodiac signs. You are observing a little bit of one sign, more of another, which results in these what they call intercepted. Intercepted means that, for example, here, if we look at the 12th house, I hope you see my cursor. The second house. The second house, we see here the sign Aquarius. But the second house actually starts with Capricorn here. Then we have the whole of Aquarius in it. And then we have a little bit of Pisces in it. Before we go to the next house, the third house, which is this. So what Nilsa was saying is that Aquarius is called intercepted sign in the second house. So we would say these are technicalities, but there, yeah, you asked, so I'm answering.
Something. Sorry to interrupt, because this is something I don't know, and thank you for bringing it up. So you say that Aquarius is intercepted. Is that correct? Is that
yes.
And so what about the bit that is in Capricorn?
That in Capricorn is the cusp of the second house in this chart. And
Right.
very important because you know that those moments of transition between one house to another between one area of experience to another are very charged points, almost like magnetically charged points. So Capricorn 21st degree in this case will be really a lot to do with what will happen for that person in the second house. What are going to be the circumstances? Because circumstances are related to houses in astrology. But then it's not going to be only Capricorn. Capricorn will probably give the initial tone, the greatest kind of accents. But then part of the experiences of the second house will be Aquarian. And part of them will be Piscean as well, a little bit. You see what I mean?
Yes, and would that actually be, I mean, you could actually time that if you were looking at transits in terms of the degrees, is that correct?
If you're following a particular planet in transit, for those who are beginners, transiting planet means moving planet. A planet that is now in the sky, we're observing the actual planet's motion. And for example, let's say Saturn. If we are observing Saturn, and Saturn happens to be located in the sky right now, around this 21st degree of Capricorn, we know that it is about to cross in this person's chart to transit the cusp of the second house and to enter their second house. And because, I mean, this is again something that I hadn't planned to touch on a lot today, because these are now details which we can talk about later. But every single cusp, this transition, these lines between the houses, they are very, very charged points, really. And one of the ways to understand a transiting planet's effect is to see when it's crossing a line like that. And probably that would be reflected into a more charged, experience, something that really can be registered as unusual, as stressing the experience of Saturn in that case. That can give you an idea of how your whole second house functions in Venus.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I think this is already getting much longer than I expected. So almost at the end, another thing that making sure that I haven't missed something that following the book, like something that he believes that we need to bear in mind or just pay attention to, is try to clarify for yourself, if you haven't already, is the advice here, the concept of the ecliptic. What's the ecliptic? Again, astronomical knowledge. I recently bought a handbook an astronomical handbook for astrologers, which is really interesting and helped me answer so many questions for myself. Also, the writings of Stephen Forrest, especially the Book of the Moon, is one of the books in which he, in very simple language that can be understood, I think, even by people that are not, that much into astrology itself. He's explaining a lot of the astronomy behind our different things that we're talking about, but just not understanding very often very well. And it is important. Like, for example, here you can see that's like a mock picture of the sky, and we see Venus, Mars, Spica or Spica, I'm not sure how it's called. This is a fixed star, but Mars and Venus are planets. So it is important to know the distinction between fixed stars and planets. I don't know whether it's worth it going through this now, that when we observe the sky, out of all those bodies there that we can see, the fixed stars don't appear to be changing their position over time to one another. So yes, as we move, because the Earth moves and it goes around its axis and around the sun all the time, but we see different sections of the sky. But at the same time, once we return back to the same section, which we remembered from, say, last year, we would find certain stars exactly where we found them before. These are the fixed stars. They also move slightly, but they move ever so slightly and so slowly that from the context of our very short human life, they don't appear to change their position. But what appears to change its position, and it does a lot all the time, are the traveling planets, the planets. Actually, I don't know if you know that planet means wanderer in Greek. Is that right, Effie? Yes, I think because I know you are Greek and you would probably know. But yes, planets mean wanderers, and they are constantly in motion, constantly rotating in their cycles. And this is what we're observing as changing factors, factors that transform every next moment. So the zodiac has been devised as a imaginary tool, because the tropical zodiac, which we use in Western astrology, which Rudhyar uses as a basis of everything he writes about, is different from the sidereal, and the tropical zodiac is imaginary. It is this division of the path of the sun around the year. And we need to, what are we dividing? We're dividing the space at the background of the fixed stars. So the fixed stars are used as a background where, so we can see that, okay, Mars is now close to Spica, this fixed star, and it will be after a while again. So we measure the period it takes it to come back to that same position. And in one of the talks I listened to Rudhyar speak, he was saying, actually, we don't need the zodiac to have astrology. I will probably try to explain what this actually means next time. The zodiac is a concept which we can as easily call those 12 signs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12. We can think of other names, but the symbology remains the same. The meaning remains the same, because what that actually is our relationship to the Earth traveling around the sun during the year. So that's why it's called tropical zodiac. Okay, let's read the quote and we'll move towards the end almost. The equator on Earth is the greatest circle of terrestrial latitude, but it is considered besides as a sort of global horizon for the human race as a whole. When infinitely extended, the plane of the equator crosses the plane formed by the yearly path of the sun around the sky. The lines formed by their intersection is the line of equinoxes. So again, that took me time to grasp myself. So I don't expect you to, if you hear this for the first time, it's just something that I think this little graphic here can help visualize, that the Earth having its equator, the equator is this dotted line because the Earth is tilted. And that's the line running to the center, as it's called. And if we imagine it extended to space, we have something like this. But then that's not the same line on which we see the sun traveling during the year. That's another line. And that line is the ecliptic. So the red line is the ecliptic. So because these two don't coincide, they cross somewhere in two places. And the places where they cross are called the equinoxes. So they cross where the sun is located in early spring and in early autumn, where we can actually observe it during those times. This is close to the points where these two lines intersect. And that's really the basis of our astrology and everything that we then take from there. The ecliptic is the other name for the zodiac. So the zodiac, the tropical zodiac, and the ecliptic are the same thing, basically. But just the zodiac is a band, which, okay, that's what I was meant to show you about that. The band of the zodiac. So here we are in the 4 points of the year, the equinoxes and the solstices, and we can see how there is this band of space. It is about 23 degrees on each side of the ecliptic. Yeah, this kind of ring, or you can imagine it as a belt or something like this, that all the planets, they stick to that area. When we see them travel, they travel within that area of the zodiac. So that's why we can say Mars is in Aquarius at the moment, Venus is in, say, in Taurus or whatever. This is a registerable thing. That's how we can calculate where everything is located in that moment. And this graphic here, I think, is very useful, very easy to see how the tropical and the sidereal zodiac are not the same thing, how they don't coincide anymore. They used to coincide in the past. So where we had the constellation Aries, we had the tropical Aries. So Aries was the point of the equinox in April was pretty much where the constellation Aries here was located in the sky. But that's no longer the case because there is a bit of a drift that happens over time of the constellations. We have talked about that in our discussion about the age of Aquarius. If you're curious to go deeper into this, of how this whole thing really works, you can look at that. But you can see that now the point of the equinox, 0 degree Aries every year, where we start our natural zodiac, tropical zodiac, where we start counting really the cycle of the year, is not happening physically where the constellation Aries is, but it's happening towards the end of Pisces. And you can see it going slowly but surely more and more towards Aquarius. So that's a very big separate topic about the precession of the equinoxes. You know, equinoxes move, the points of the equinox moves over time. It's just the way it is. We can discuss it later if you wish at another time. But for every astrologer, it is important to choose what system they're going to use. Are they going to base their calculations on the tropical zodiac or the sidereal zodiac? I think a lot of the traditional techniques are still insisting on the sidereal zodiac, even though it is not related to the experience of the seasons that we now on Earth have. They're not coinciding anymore, but they have their own ways of thinking. Again, Western astrology and humanistic astrology is using the tropical zodiac. Fine. Finally, last slide. It's an example of an ephemeris table. It's just to mention quickly that there can be no astrologer without an ephemeris. Even with all the modern software and pages online where you can calculate a chart quickly, everyone can go out and calculate a chart. You don't need an astrologer for that. You can see your chart on your own and study it on your own. But you probably won't know what it means at all, but that's another question. But to be a practicing astrologer, I think it's vital to have an ephemeris. This is a table which we can download, again, for free from many places, or you can buy it as a book or whatever, which is giving us, this is an example month, for example, all the astronomical data that we need about the location of the planets by latitude, which means in the zodiac, degree by degree, step by step, every single day. And this can reveal things that cannot be seen in the chart in any other way. For example, let's pick, you see, this is a simple calendar. We have days 1 to 30 in this September 2012, just as an example. And all the planets, we can see that, for example, on the 1st of September, the moon was in Pisces, Mercury on the last degree of Leo, Venus 25th degree of Cancer, and so on. But then you see every single day the pace in which they change, they're progressive, moving forward in the zodiac. So the moon being a very, very fast planet, on the next day, it's already about to get out of this sign, and on the 3rd of September, it's already in Aries, the next sign. But Mercury is still in the same sign. So actually here we have the coincidence that it changed signs between the 1st and the 2nd of this month. But say from the 2nd of September onwards, Mercury stays in that sign of Virgo for maybe more than a month, which is usually the case. And this gives you over time, if you follow the tables, well, I'm not saying you have to look at them every single day or for every chart, but we can see what's not just the speed and get accustomed to the speed of the cycles of each planet, and also register, most importantly, the turning points of direction. You know that most of the planets can go retrogrades. That's another whole topic that I'm not going to say anything about what it means. but every now and then they appear to be moving backwards. And for example, we can have in a birth chart of a person a retrograde Venus. And I know that most of you know that this is quite unusual. Not everybody has retrograde Venus in their chart. Maybe about 15% of the population can have it. And by following in the table of ephemeris from the date of their birth, which we can check, we can count how many days after the birth Venus changed direction and went from retrograde to direct. If that happens 18 days after they were born, that means that in the progressions, the person is going to have a retrograde Venus by age 18. And then from age 18, something is going to shift. And this shift is going to be a very important turning point in their life in relationship to the function of Venus, for example. And many other things like that can be taken as examples. But usually the pace of the planets in their cycles and those turning points of changing signs or changing direction, which could be extremely important. So that's how these are tables that we use to check at any moment. So for example, I want to see 5 days from now, what would be the condition of the sky? Where will everything be? I can calculate a chart and give like a transit chart and say, give me the chart for, say today is the 25th, for the 1st of March. And I can still see that Venus, Mars, everything is in a particular degree of the zodiac. But I won't be able to see where it is in its own cycle, which the ephemeris can give me. Okay, so that's it. Final slide is to do with some recommended books. Apart from the book that we are talking about today and running through, this is the Astrology of Personality, the main work by Rudhyar that he wrote in the 30s, but then over time revised a lot of the concepts, kind of modernized them even more and kind of adjusted some of the things, especially like for things about the nodes, what they really mean, how to calculate them and so on. But this is still the book for Rudhyar. So maybe someone needs to be a little bit more familiar with more basic things that Rudhyar wrote before delving into this one. It's not the most, it's not the easiest one to read, but not that difficult too. It's a reference book for me. So very often I go back to certain small passages of it to, to see something that I need to. But especially the first part is containing things that you want to be able to find in any other of his books. So it's online now. I have it online too, so that gives us a lot of flexibility. You can just buy it on your Kindle or on your computer, whatever. Then the person-centered astrology. That one is a bunch of articles that cover a lot of the topics that have been covered in Astrology for Personality, but they're more, this one is more accessible, a bit easier to read, more concise, and more to the point in a way. It is a much later written book when Rudhyar was already in his mature years and already started to synthesize his philosophy and his ideas and giving more shortcuts because it was getting important to distill the message at that point. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, Rudhyar experienced the greatest popularity of his work, which was appreciated much, much later in his life. The most productive decades being the 70s and the 80s of his life, and maybe the 60s as well. So that's something quite unusual. So here we have somebody that worked very patiently and very self-assuredly over the course of more than 50, 60 years, writing a lot, more than 16 books of astrology, thousands of articles, a lot of them you can read online as well. But it was kind of in vain for many years, wasn't appreciated, wasn't registered, a lot of what he did until the 60s and 70s when there was a big upsurge. So yeah, something to check. And finally, Michael Mayer was, say, a student, we can say, of Rudhyar, a guy that was relatively young at the time when Rudhyar was in his most productive times and lecturing and sharing. And he took it upon himself to write this very, very useful handbook for the humanistic astrologer, which is a book of summary of the basic ideas of humanistic astrology. And that was reviewed by Rudhyar. So Rudhyar was kind of approved of it. He saw it and was able to say, yeah, that's a relatively good representation, even though very concise and very, like, not really the thing, but could be helpful to students. And I have it too. I use it very often, and it's a good shortcut many times. So thank you so much for listening to me for such a long time. And now it's time for the general discussion. You can unmute yourself. I haven't seen the chart, so I will respond now.
Fabulous presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. Yes, Lauren.
I was going to ask a question that stimulated through the presentation, and that is I realize I am a humanistic astrologer by those definitions. That's my leaning. But when I listen to it, it almost seems like one should do the chart from where the person is living right now in order to examine the transits of the current time. That normally I take the natal chart and do the transits without relationship to where they're living right now. But listening to the lecture, I was wondering what you thought of that.
You mean whether to relocate the chart when you're looking at it?
No, I'm just saying if we're really looking at the horizon and the everything of where the person is and how they're being affected outwardly, coming and part of being still in with free will, why do we go back to the place of birth instead of the place they are now as the important piece to the current transits? Current transits, you would think, should come at the same place as the person is right now. Good to show the basic psychological genetics of the natal chart and have that as is, but according to what I listened to today, it makes me think I should be putting for transits, not the natal, but where the person is at the current moment.
Well, you can think of it in another way. Where was the seed planted? So maybe we use the birth chart because that's where the seed was planted. And that's where we have the code of how this is going to develop. The transits can be mapped out from the beginning, from that first moment. We don't know where the person is going to move. Maybe they can move all around the place in the world during their life. But still the seed was, so basically, if we imagine that we have something of the overall, say, energetic field, I don't know how to call it, of this first moment on that place of the earth where they were born, stamped on the person, then this is carried through over the course. That's how I understand it personally. I mean, you can experiment with revocation, but this seed is still planted in that soil. Then maybe the branches came in a little bit wider and they touched on the, on other territories as well, or something like this. But I would always use I mean, this is the standard procedure anyway. It would be a little bit exotic probably to try and relocate for transits, but you can map out the transits from there. You know, this is a baby, still 1 day old, but you already know, if you want to calculate it, if you want to take the time, that when they are, say, I don't know, 50 years old, there will be Pluto crossing their 8th house or whatever, because we know how long it will take Pluto to reach a certain place on the transits, isn't it? Or any other planet. So it's interesting for relocation. I use solar returns. I always relocate solar returns, but not the actual chart, because the chart, I think, is something that you carry with you. It's kind of fixed. It's kind of we need to pay homage to not just the time and everything, because think about it this way: if you relocate the birth chart, the things in the positions of planets in houses and the ascendant will also change. So you're not simply applying transits, you're applying transits to some completely different chart. So I guess the question is, do we have a different chart if we go to another and live to another place? My quick personal answer is no, we don't have another chart. But maybe we have another temporary chart, which is for those, say, number of years you spend in a place where your solar return reflects different positions of ascendant, of everything else. Does that make sense to you?
I would have to say it does partially. It's a relief to that, but it also it was stimulated by the chart, by your presentation, that question.
Yes, I think you have a point with solar returns. I think you have a major point here in what you are kind of sensing could be a good idea, because yeah, I when we spoke about solar returns, if you remember, I showed you my 3 charts for the
Yes.
3 locations I normally am at, and how I really can see how those changes that come between the charts, I was in Bulgaria for a month over the winter, and I was able to experience my actual, maybe I'm making it up, who knows, we can never have real proof, but I really kind of so reflected in the overall experience, atmosphere, the way I was, the way relationships were, everything, more in that Bulgarian solar return chart. The moment I came back to Valencia, things are back to another mode of operation. And in the 2 charts, I've got different ascendants and many differences actually this year. So, but the birth chart is something very foundational, I believe. What do you guys think? Anyone else wants to say? Answer
Well,
that?
I was gonna
Lauren,
say,
I always,
Mhm.
I mean, make my layman examples here. I always try to connect astrology with layman examples in real life, real time. So I would simply say, if I am an Indian, I am a resident of India, and I have an Indian nationality with an Indian passport. No matter if I move to China, I'll still remain an Indian. The passport never changes. It's the identity. So you cannot change the passport, you cannot change the nationality. That's how it is. I mean, let's assume the life of a passport, the life of a nationality with the lifespan of a human being. Let's not compare the years in figures actually, but the theory of it, but the dictum of it is that no matter you move to any country or any city in the world, the nationality, the passport remains the same. So your birth chart is your passport.
Okay. So this I like that comparison. Maybe not passport as much as, you know, you have an identity, part of which place where you were born in. And even if you spend only 1 day there and then immediately moved somewhere else, you still have something in you instilled. I believe this is my personal belief. Maybe other I don't know, schools may say something different, but I really think that that initial location of where the chart happened. You couldn't have seen the sky the way you saw it, with everything ordered the way it's ordered in your chart, from another place.
And even if we talk about the transits, let's say the transit position of the planets right where I am, where it's almost past midnight now, and somewhere in US it will be daytime, so not much of a difference except for the longitudes of moon. Except for the longitudes of moon, which is the fastest moving planet. Apart from it, there won't be much of a change. Otherwise, most of the rest of the planets, which are slow moving planets, will have almost exactly similar latitudes. Maybe in minutes or seconds they may be here or there a little bit, but yes, except for the moon, everything would be the same.
Right, and this
great discussion. I was just wondering, as we're discussing location, how or if any of this plays into astrocartography, or is that something that people consider? Is that something that people find a valid way of looking at things, or what other people's approach is or take is on astrocartography?
Yes, it is a big part of it, and this is going to be one of the topics in the very last part of this book. Touches on astrocartography. There are even some very interesting things there that I haven't seen anywhere else, some curiosities that I wanted to share with you. But yeah, that's part of it. And maybe it's such a big topic that now we won't be able to really properly say anything about it. But you know, I wanted to just quickly mention something. Listening to Rudhyar speaking in one of those audios, he said that something that now I can see how we here are going in that direction a bit. We are again going back to techniques about details, which is great. But he said, you know what, there is some disingenuity, I don't know how to call it, dishonesty going on among some astrologers, saying that someone having a slightly different time of birth is now having a completely different chart. And they're saying, oh, now this is a totally different chart, which on the one hand is true. You know, technically that's true. And yes, a lot of different, maybe if the same astrologer is looking at chart number 1 and chart number 2, they would probably have different conclusions. But if different astrologers are looking at those two charts that have like 10-minute difference between them, they probably will make absolutely no difference between them, says Rudhyar. So let's try to also not over exaggerate those little details, which sometimes are so particular and so small, even though everything is important in the chart, that we're losing track of the whole picture of the chart. That at the end of the day, will probably give us the whole message will be the same. You know, the holistic message of the chart will be the same. Like we were speaking with Dwayne about the systems, like he's using recently, what was it, the whole sign system, not the whole sign, the natural zodiac system, and how we look at charts that are constructed completely differently. Houses are totally different, but they speak the same language. They speak the same, they give the same message at the end of the day. So it's a very thin line, I think, here between how accurate we are and how important that accuracy is. Do you agree?
I'll
Yes,
jump
I
in.
agree. Mhm.
Since I was born in South Dakota, which is in the middle of the United States, 44 degrees north, 96 west, currently living in Los Angeles, 34 north, 118 west. And relocating my chart, which I think, Lauren, is what you were really talking about, moves the major change is my moon in the 12th moves into my first house.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like comparing, I would get a baby picture to a picture of me today. I've obviously changed. You may not be able to tell that this man was that infant. But the reality is, I'm still that infant. And by moving the moon into the first house, being out here allowed me to become aware of the moon. But the moon is still in the 12th house. And so even though I'm more aware of it, I'm aware of my 12th house moon. I'm not aware of a first house moon. I'm aware of my 12th house moon. So if, you know, when you're talking about doing a chart for somebody today, if they have relocated, I would look at, you know, I would start with their natal chart. And you may want to look at the relocated chart to see, has there been any big change, any shift of planets from houses, particularly from over one of the angles.
Mhm.
If something moves from 6 to 7 or 9 to 10 or 12 to 1 in particular, it may be that by relocating, it allows them now to become more aware of that 12th house planet because it's now in their first house, but it's still a 12th house planet.
Mhm. Yes, a super
And
smart. Yeah, I love that.
okay, I'll add one more thing. If you do two charts at the same time in two different locations, you do a tropical chart in India and a tropical chart in England at the exact same moment, even though they're different time zones, everything is going to be the same in terms of their zodiacal position. Nothing moves. What changes is the house placements and the house cusps.
Mhm.
Now, one may be a night chart with the sun below the horizon, and the other may be a day chart. But the moon, every planet will be at the same degree and minute of the zodiac that it in both charts.
Yes.
Because relocating, if you do charts at the same moment in time, the zodiac doesn't move. Position of the planets they don't change just because you're in two different locations when you do the chart.
Yeah, and I think it's a very good point that if you get the two charts, the birth and the relocated, sometimes there isn't a lot of difference. Sometimes there are major differences, and
Yes.
I have experimented this between Bulgaria and London, and I can see how, because the majority of my conscious life was in London, this is a different chart, and really can clearly see how everything could have been different in circumstances, because the houses are, at the end of the day, according to Rudhyar, for example, they are the slightly bigger factor. Not that the zodiac isn't, but the zodiac is more of a common human factor for everyone. Like,
Yes.
well, the houses are really what makes the big personal difference. And like you said, James, it is such a different moon if it's in the 12th and in the 1st. That's
very different.
The moon, it's totally different. But maybe that other place helps the moon emerge out from the 12th house and go to the 1st and rediscover itself and add something related to 1st house to its original 12th house nature. But the original 12th house nature remains, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't change. What happens is when you move east-west, that's when you get the greatest shift in your ascendant, the angles and the house cusps. Moving north and south along that same line doesn't really shift things much. When you go east and west, that you start to see the shift.
Yes.
So that's why you see a big shift from Bulgaria to London. I get the big shift from South Dakota, California. I didn't have as much of a shift when I lived back east, Washington, D.C., Buffalo, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, but still it was there. So that's when you see the shifting.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, I hope we can explore astrocartography together later on. We can have a look at an example chart. It's really all over the chart of the world and see how things, they reveal a lot of things. But that's another area altogether.
Yeah.
My first consultation I had with an astrologer was because of astrocartography. It was like something I wanted to explore but didn't know anything about. And it's very interesting.
If I can interject something here in terms of explaining the difference between a relocation and astrocartography. In astrocartography, you're looking at the lines and you're trying to find the place on the map or on Earth that may be best suited for the person to do something, maybe career-wise, relationship-wise, or something of that nature. Relocation is just when they physically move there, or they just, if you just move because like maybe you get transferred from your job, or you get married, whatever, and you move, that's relocating, and that's done generally without thinking in terms of how, is this going to be a favorable place for me or not? But astrocartography is the process of determining a favorable place.
That's right. Who knows what it really is, because it's such a new technique that I'm starting to question some of those things. But it shows the lines of the different planets in your chart running through different areas of the world. And what really seems logical, and I think it works, is that certain areas are more charged with the symbol of that planet. So if you're struggling by birth with that planet, in general, or if you're not very good friends with your, say, Mars, better avoid the areas where Mars is accentuated, because you may be in trouble, or the other way around. But again, who knows? Maybe all the places we naturally, intuitively are led in our life are somehow important, and we need to go backwards. And then, for example, me having ended up in Spain without necessarily having planned with astrocartography to come here. Later, if I check what's the situation around Spain in my astrocartography, I can get the answer of why. Why was it that I came here? What in my chart needed work? What in my chart needed to be activated by this place? So I pay attention.
Yeah, people move for different reasons, but you often, if you like where you're at. You may find that you're feeling comfortable here. You enjoy wherever the here might be. It's because you have almost intuitively, as you say, moved to a positive, a more favorable place from the standpoint of astrocartography. So it's kind of like you look at it, you look at the astrocartography after you move.
Yes.
If you're ready to move and you don't know where to go and you want to try to find a more favorable place, then you would can use astrocartography to try to find a place. When I do astrocartography consultations, I always advise the person. I ask them if they've ever been someplace like on a vacation or something where they really felt at home, really enjoyed it. And I will also advise, suggest if they can, if Albuquerque, New Mexico looks like a good spot for you, if you've never been there, go there on a vacation, go there for a few days and see how it feels before you pack up and move.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's always going to be some less favorable aspects to anything.
Sure.
Even in astrocartography.
And also that gets into the realm of a little bit of the fortune telling.
Yeah.
And originally my question, yes, I have studied astrocartography and I have looked at mine and all that stuff. It was just because of the slide about the horizon, the elliptical, and all of that. I was thinking of the implications. And I definitely agree that who you are stays the natal, and that wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah. Lauren, actually, I'm thinking of something else. Let's say the birth moment is sacred. So your birth moment happens in a particular place. But what if when you relocate in some place completely different, then you feel like this is a rebirth for you. If you really are starting but this is consciously done, a completely new life, maybe it's worth it having a new chart calculated for yourself with your original birth date, but with this to to study that.
I mean, my life re-began when I moved to Ibiza, Spain. My life re-began when I lived in Maui, Hawaii. But there were so many factors as well. But anyway,
yes,
I think your presentation in general was very worthwhile, and I appreciated the idea that we don't become just intellects, but that we think very carefully, why are we doing this, and be very aware of our clients' sensitivities to receive information. I've had so many people that knew me through music that wanted to get an astrological chart. And so I came across many people who were very scared I was going to tell them they're going to die in a year or this or that. And I just had to say, I'm all about trying to empower you. Let's look at your psychological structures and how you can, and then they'd give a specific life situation, excuse me, where they were looking for assistance. And we could look at different things in the chart that this is the predisposition, and now, but these are your areas to break forward. Or in my own thing, when you and I looked at my chart, we could make sense that, not knowing coronavirus would take out my musical career in a certain way, but that it was a logical time to change into the more metaphysical nature that has always been there.
Exactly. That's a very good point. And we don't always realize that it's not only about astrology that we have to talk to people about. It's because of if we take the view that I try to kind of we talk from the book today, we have to explain to every single person, it's not this, but it's that. So it's not how things don't work that way, but so basically you have to, at the end of the day, offer a different life philosophy altogether, or choose whether to have that life philosophy in your own work, in your astrological work. And that's, I think, the foundation of everything. because otherwise we just talk. We just, it's all, as you
Also,
say, technicalities and knowledge for the sake of knowledge, which what is actually can be very destructive. Sometimes it can be very destructive because either we become more confused, other people get more confused than the other way around. And my friends that claim to be astrologers, some of them, they even now after years come and say, look, Saturn is going to my whatever. I'm going to experience that. So even we somehow automatically, because we are under the influence of that culture out there, of viewing astrology in that fatalistic way, we somehow go in that direction without thinking every now and then, aren't we? I do it too, without even realizing.
yeah, I have to think of a moment or two like that. Yes. I remember seeing in someone I've known all my life, so the 67 years of it, I saw she's the one that is 94, and I saw Venus in her 8th house, and I didn't know anything, and I didn't know if her mother had died early or what had happened, but it's also that context. And what I learned was that her mother had to leave her very early on. She was a single mother and had to move away, and she was raised by her grandmother. So although her mother didn't die and loved her tremendously, she did experience that psychological loss of the actual mother. But so it has to be interactive with the person, and we can't force astrology. Like, the fears that I keep getting from people is, please don't, I'm so scared you're going to tell me something terrible. I can't tell you, very mature people tell me that. A master car builder who had a chart from me, he was so frightened I was going to say something like that rather than be so empowering to him.
That's the reputation. Unfortunately, we can't fight the reputation like in a big extent. We can't convince the world that to change the rhetoric about it, because maybe it's not time yet. It will happen naturally, I believe, over time. But again, at the end of the day, maybe astrology is not for everyone. That's another food for thought. But is it not the best thing? What would you say? I mean, one of the best things is that if you start seeing those big patterns, like following the lunation cycle, for example, studying the lunation cycle of the person that's coming, you have done like a homework to go through the stages and see what and transits and progressions may have resulted in the current crisis, or can justify the current crisis, or somehow give explanation. Then this explanation can heal and can give them like a door through which then they can take it from there and do something with it, rather than having this. But yeah, inevitably we have to spend every half an hour of every consultation explaining first what is not going to happen, or what is not going to be. It is unfortunate, but that's what it is.
And you also talked, so I don't want to dominate, but you asked in your presentation about, I have found great synchronicities that between who comes to me and what's something I need to know as well, or something I just heard from one of our group seminars, or something I listened to or just read in a book. So yes, this a level of synchronicity, as if what you desire to know begins to come to you as you formulate it, or even if you don't know you need to know it, it's on its way because of the more holographic nature or fractal nature. Fractal being, that there is a wholeness implied in everything.
That's right. And also we, as Rudhyar says, we cannot just think that we give out the information, do our job, and we're done with it. We have to be, he says, willing to enter into a relationship with this, even if it's for half an hour in this particular case. This is important. It needs to be both two-sided. I don't know how to say. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It just something break somewhere, I think, along the lines. I don't know.
It took me quite a while when I was studying and working as an astrologer to shift my gears from putting everything in the chart and delineating the different point positions and aspects to looking at the chart holistically and working from more of a holistic approach to the chart to get a better sense of the individual and then be able to speak to laymen or individuals who really aren't familiar with the language of astrology in understandable language. It took me quite a while to do that. It was probably the most challenging thing I had to do. But in part, then it's probably because I'm a Virgo and have Mercury at 0 Virgo, and they're intercepted in the 9th house. So yeah, it doesn't always come easy.
My 6th house hears you, James. Like 6th planet, 6th house. Well, I know what you're saying. It's a bit of a dilemma, isn't it? That you need to know a lot in order to present only the essence. And at the end of the day, you need to present just the essence and to make all those judgments very quickly, what to say, what to not say, and what really is there. You have to have all this technical knowledge to have checked all the stuff in your own time before the guy or the girl came. And in order to be very simple when the consultation is in reality. So that's a big challenge.
And one thing I notice, if I'm very thorough, there's repeating patterns. It happens here, it happens here, it's in a Rudhyar message, it's in a Sabian symbol, it's in this, it's in that. And there is this repeating message,
Right.
like honk, honk, honk on the head.
Yeah, maybe that's that you're in the right place, that you are in the right job, let's say.
Yeah, and it's identifying that theme and focusing on that theme, because the reality is the person's only going to go away with a couple of things. At best, they might retain 2 or 3 things that you say. There's also a danger in the idea. Yeah, fortune telling is, I think, a bit of a misnomer, because it's really future prediction or future telling, because we think of fortune telling as telling somebody what's going to happen in the future. So why don't we call it future telling? The problem, though, or danger that's there, is that as soon as you tell somebody that something's going to happen in the future or something might happen in the future, you've changed it.
Exactly.
Because their behavior is going to change how they approach that future point.
And certainly the particle theory of that, of the particle theory is that when you observe the particle, it changes the particle's movements. And so we are more affecting, I feel that way with health, to think, oh, this is what happened to me from the outside, versus I am a powerful creator and I'm also creating my health and I can create my wellness.
Yeah.
We're not victims.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
the ideal would be to help them find ways to better approach, deal with, any potential problems that might come up. Somebody approaching their first Saturn return or their midlife crisis, when you get that cluster of Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune aspect. It can be, or somebody who's got a Pluto transit through, or the ascendant or one of the angles. That can be probably the most traumatic of any transit, I think. But
my mother was telling me that she was concerned about her son who's 42, and I said, 42, that's the age, that's the transformation of Uranus. So
right. Uranus, you got Uranus opposed Uranus, Neptune square Neptune, Saturn opposing Saturn,
Pluto square Pluto,
and Jupiter opposing Jupiter. Yeah. You get just so much stuff going on.
Yeah.
And
yes, but the Pluto, I just want to say about the Pluto, and not always. Pluto is so erratic that now our generations are living through Pluto square Pluto a lot younger.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not for everyone, but people born roughly 1960 to 1995 happened a lot earlier, as opposed to the older generations who are experiencing it in their 60s. But it's still that big transformational period whenever it happens for someone. Mhm.
That's right. And do you realize, for example, the moment of interpretation, like let's say someone is a little older, they're in their 60s, and they come to the second Saturn return. It's not just about that. That is the second Saturn return. It will be a crisis, so on. If we investigate a little bit, asking them questions about the dates, around the dates of the previous turning points of the Saturn cycle in their life, because they have the experience, we can judge a little bit, at least, how well they dealt with the previous steps of Saturn. Starting, say, from the first Saturn return, what decisions they made when they were 30, then how they played with that during the whole cycle up to 60. Were they friends with Saturn? Were they doing what they were supposed to do in every stage, or were they not? Because if you don't face a crisis, it may pass, but then the next turning point is even harder, and the next turning point is even harder. So you can have someone at 60 that has really done a good job of working on themselves throughout the whole process so far. So they would experience the second Saturn return in one way. But somebody that had, avoided it all, or tried to avoid it all, they may experience something a lot more dramatic, isn't it?
That's true. I also think about, in terms of the stages of human development, the older years, looking at that as the winter, where it's more about reflection. So it's not necessarily charting out, where the big turn is, but looking back on your life, as you said, on that first Saturn return, to say what I did and did not do, and using that as a reference point.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's almost time to go, not yet, but so just to say, I'm planning for 4 more sessions like this, but the next ones will be, again, following the book until the end, because it's rather short, and I think it's important, that book, for everyone, as some sort of a basic introduction to humanistic astrology. And next time will be planets, signs, and the overall solar system. If you want, you can read for yourself the actual topics, and take part. If you want to take part in something, like a quick comment, a small presentation of some point in the book, instead of me doing it, you can tell me. You can write to me, and we can mix it up a little bit. Doesn't need to be just me talking. So,
Radelina, you did say at some point that you would give us the link of where we can listen to Dane Rudhyar. Would you be able to do that, please?
Yeah, of course. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's rudhyarinstitute.org. And this is called Dane Rudhyar Audio Archives. I will try to give you the link in the chat box. Let me see if that's gonna work. And there are many talks. I mean, most of them are from when Rudhyar was very old, like several years before he died. So in his 90s, pretty much. But the audio is a little bit bad quality, but still good enough. I mean, I really enjoy them. And it changes a lot to be able to hear from him. And here you can find different topics. Some of them are tied to the books. So what he discusses in the relevant talk is to do with the book. Yeah, I'm just looking for that one. This is the one. So the practice of astrology. And if you look at these first steps in the interpretation of birth charts. Yeah, do you see that?
Rudhyar.org. Okay.
Rudhyar.org. Yeah, you're gonna find them all there. Yes, they're very good audios. And not a lot exists from Rudhyar. I mean, I think there is only one video interview on YouTube, and these ones here, the audios. I don't know of any other resources. If you know of something rare that you have found, let me know as well.
I'd like to add one thing about Saturn returns,
Yes.
which we tend not to think about. Some may not know about it. Most people will experience their first Saturn return by the time they're 8 months old.
Mhm.
The experience most people experience their first Saturn return within a few months after birth.
What do you mean by that?
Saturn returns to its natal position
Ah, I see. Okay. Yes.
because that's the reality of Saturn's movements.
Mhm.
But we don't talk about that one. We don't think about that. We only think about the 29 and 58 and 87. But the reality is you get one early in life. And you might want to look to see if you've had one. And if so, when that was, and then consider what was going on in the family environment at that time.
That's a good point. That would be something peculiar for every.
Yeah, that's for another session when we maybe just focus on Saturn.
Yeah, well, maybe even next week, because there will be a bit of every planet.
Mm-hmm.
While mentioning that, but there will be another session. I'm not sure which one. I think the fourth one is about transits and progressions only.
Yeah.
So there will be a great time for examples, where we can look at an example chart where we can follow the transits or the progressions of someone to illustrate it.
Here's another trick. If you go looking for it, you find it, and it occurs, say, within a few days, maybe a month or so after your birth. If you're not, what you can do then is do a progression, secondary progression of your natal chart to that point in time to see what age you were when that happened by progression, because that may be significant.
Yes, sure. Yeah. And we can discover some things about the person, say the client, by investigating all those bits, as you said. We discover many important.
I had an epiphany last night, but I'm going to save that for another time because it involves a totally different subject.
Okay, well, I hope we will have plenty of opportunities to be together and to speak about those things. Dwayne, you're being very quiet today.
Yeah, well, it's been very full. I'm busy digesting, and I took lots of notes. I feel like I'm a student back in school.
Yeah,
it's great.
Okay, well, I hope it's not too schooly, but yeah, I at the end of the day, I discovered I have more of a tendency for that than for something else. So I hope it's helpful, at least. And
I think it was very helpful. I really, because you went through things maybe that one already knew, but also you came out with, explaining them maybe in different ways and so forth.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Radilina.
Thank you, Simona. Well, this book, for example, which is considered to be simple, I've read it like 5 times, and every time I'm discovering that I didn't quite get that one last time. I mean, this is the thing with Rudhyar. That's why it's a big task. It's an enormous task. But let's discover together. So that's why I will be happy if you read too. I'm telling you what I'm going to be talking about exactly. It's only 3 chapters, which is 3 pages, literally, not 3 chapters even, of the book next time, and to discuss together and see. You can correct me if something is not quite right. Yeah. But also trying to somehow give a shortcut for people, online that are not with us, that may listen to this to discover Rudhyar a little bit, because I feel like there is a bit of a barrier there, and now getting a generational barrier too, because he's a person from a completely different generation, world, and sounds in a way that maybe modern, I don't know, young people will not. Will not be able to reach to that much. So yeah, I hope we're doing something good this way, and look forward to next time.
We get together and share and talk and learn, and that's good. So
yes, I enjoyed it very much. Try to leave more time for discussion next time and less for talk, but yeah, there will be some more real astrology things next time, like specifics. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for being with me. And we have the group now. I mean, this group is quite late, quite old, to be honest. The Rudhyar group. I don't know if you are there already. I might have invited you these days. I set it up on Facebook. I mean, a group on Facebook. Set it up 3-4 years ago or something, but had totally neglected it. So now I thought it's a good time to use it as a, during the week, if you want to discuss something, not just with me, with anyone else there about this. All right.
Thank you
Great.
again.
Thank you too.
See you next week.
Sweet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.